Welcome to the Pet Loss Journals podcast. I am your host Louise. This podcast is all about the reality and impact pet loss has on our lives, and I will be discussing my personal journey through pet loss. So if you are struggling on your own pet loss journey, then this is the podcast for you. Hello, welcome to episode 3 of the Pet Loss Journals with your host, myself, Louise. And I just wanted to say, if you have gotten to episode 3, thank you so much. Thank you so much for listening to episode 1 and 2, and I hope that you got something from it, or you felt some connection while listening to the episodes. As I say each week, these episodes are all about me sharing quite vulnerable parts of myself while I was in the midst of grief when my 2 dogs passed away in 2019, and I share snippets from my journals that I had written around that time and the couple of years following. And I'm sharing these snippets and extracts from my journals to help people to maybe feel their own emotions and feelings. And as I've said before, grief is such a roller coaster of emotional energy. And that roller coaster is not linear. It doesn't follow any path, any stage, anything. It is completely unique to every individual that is experiencing a major loss experience in their life. And I'm creating this podcast and this space for listeners to feel somewhat validated in what they're feeling, because pet loss grief is so discounted, ignored, misunderstood, and is not given the time and respect that it needs. People need to feel seen and heard in this particular form of grief. And yeah, that is why I'm here. These episodes are really not scripted. The only thing that I'm reading from a sheet of paper is literally the section of my journal entry that I want to share each week, and that's all. It's really just me expressing, and it's really just coming from the heart. So, well, I won't wait any longer, and I will get straight into it. And this journal entry is from the 30th of October 2019. This day last week, I buried my 2 babies, Ozzy and Moose. This last month has been the worst month of my life. I felt I was coping after my 6-year relationship came to an end, but now to lose both of my dogs, I feel I have nothing left. My house feels empty. I feel empty. I walked the fields 3 days after we buried them, sobbing, wishing they were with me, running around. That's my journal entry that I want to share with you all this week. And it is very emotional, and I do feel some emotion when I read these journal entries out, and that is completely normal and natural. But if we look at this journal entry in a little bit more detail, it was obvious that, not obvious to me at the time, but it was obvious to others around me that I had gone through a really difficult time. My 6-year relationship ended with my partner at the time, and 4 weeks after that, both of my dogs tragically died, and I didn't come to terms with that breakup being a grief experience, that I was grieving. I didn't associate breakups with grief. Now, since I've learned and educated myself around grief so much, I realised that, wow, I was actually grieving the relationship that ended. And then, bang, both of my dogs died. So that grief nearly overshadowed the grief I was feeling for the breakup. And I want to share that because I know that a lot of listeners might have gone through some kind of situations or similar situations like this, where a multitude of losses happen in a row or in close proximity to each other. And it doesn't matter the type of loss, whether that is health loss, whether that is a breakup or a divorce or ending of a career path, this is all relevant. And when these losses happen really, really close together, it is extremely difficult to navigate life. Extremely difficult. My sense of navigating life at that time was I was completely numb. I was just walking around in a shell of how I felt I used to be. It's hard to describe, but some of you may have felt similar or somewhat something like that. And I kind of felt like the grief I was experiencing for both of my dogs was way more intense and powerful than the grief that I was feeling 4 weeks prior when the relationship ended. It overpowered it, it overtook it, it replaced that grief as such. That's how I felt. Several years later, I had to deal with the grief of that relationship ending when I learned, how to do my grief recovery work, my personal work. And this is what happens when we have a multitude of losses really close together. Sometimes we struggle we're so overwhelmed and we're struggling what do I process first? And we shove things to the back. I push things down, so I push that down. And that's normal. That's completely normal and natural for a human to do that, because we cannot take everything on. It's too overwhelming. It's too intense. Our nervous system is just not designed to take all of those traumas and grief and loss experiences all at once. It's impossible to process these all at the same time. So if you're going through something similar right now, or you have done in the past or recently, then I empathize with you. And please know that if you are on a healing journey, and please don't put pressure on yourself. I put so much pressure on myself to be able to, how am I going to, feel better really, really fast and deal with all this stuff, and how do I learn how to deal with it, and put so much pressure on myself to do that. And it's either you're doing that, trying to learn how to feel better, or you're doing the opposite, and it's, I'm just going to deal with this another time in my life, and I'm going to bury this. I'm going to bury it really deep down until it resurfaces, and it always does resurface, unfortunately. So looking at another part of the journal entry is, my house feels empty, I feel empty. That is completely normal and natural to feel like that. And sobbing in the fields where I used to walk them for really long walks every single day, and looking behind me and they're not running around like absolute little lunatics loving their lives. That was really difficult for me, and I know some listeners would have a similar experience where they may or may not go back to a really lovely place that they walked their animal companion or brought their animal companion regularly. But if they do and they go back on their own, initially for the first couple of times or however long, it doesn't matter how many times, it can be really, really painful. It can be really painful to go there. And your brain almost tricks you into thinking, oh no, they're here with you. You come here all the time. But then reality kicks in and you look around and you visually cannot see your pets with you and in that special place that you all loved going. So that was heartbreaking for me at the time, and I did feel that what is the point in coming to these fields walking anymore? And as time went on and I started to heal and started to do a lot of my grief recovery work, my personal work with grief, I was able to go back to these fields and go back to these places that I used to bring my dogs regularly. And now I'm in a place where I feel close to them in these places. Now I go to these places that they absolutely adored and loved. And now I can visualise them running around and living their best lives, and the happiness and the joy that they're experiencing. That's what I remember now. That's what I remember, and I'm not tormented by the last few days on this earth that they had, or the last few hours. And I want to reassure you as a listener that you can get to that place too, that it is so possible. It's so possible to get to that place, and that there is support out there for people that are grieving pets. And something that I wanted to talk about as well is a lot of people that I help while they're going through their pet loss journey. Often, they sometimes say that I just don't know what to do. I don't know my life without my animal companion. I don't know my life without my pet. I'm not sure, like even the simplest of things, like, getting up to go into the kitchen and there isn't a little shadow following us, going to the bathroom, the simple little things in life that can be so difficult for someone that is going through grief. And those little things are completely normal to feel. That might be the most painful things, even though it's hard to explain. It's so hard to explain to others that it's just the day-to-day things that are the toughest to try and get through. We think that we go into a room or we wake up in the morning and we forget for a split second that our pet has died. That happened to me so many times, and I know that it happens to a lot of you as listeners. And if you were listening to this and you were struggling, and if you were listening to this and you were getting some comfort or some validation from what I am saying, or connecting with anything that I am saying, please know that your life won't go back to normal. No, I'm not saying that it will, because life won't be the same. It won't ever be the same. But please know that there is so much help out there. There is so much help out there, and I will be able to talk about that in the coming weeks, of how I can help people specifically through pet loss, and how I've helped previous clients through pet loss, and giving some advice and tips and so on. But my main takeaway for today's episode is really, please have awareness that this grief is real, and these journal entries that I am reading to you is the absolute truth and the raw reality of what some people go through after their animal companion passes away and leaves us. And Some people will have similar experiences from the journal entries that I read out. Some people may connect to certain parts of them. And in that can be healing. Having awareness, if you're listening to this or you found this podcast, it is no coincidence. No coincidence that you're listening to me right now. You are searching for ways to soothe the pain that you're in. And the pain that you're in is completely valid. It's heartbreak, it's devastation, it's horrendous pain. There are physical pains that people feel when they're grieving. Chest pains and headaches and sleepless nights and lack of concentration. The list goes on. There's so many responses and so many symptoms that grief causes. So, that being said, I hope that you have enjoyed this episode, and I hope that you can join me for next week's episode where I will be reading another journal entry. Please know that you are not alone. There are so many people out there that are going through similar pain. We all don't know what one another are going through exactly, but we can empathise because maybe we have gone through a similar or familiar situation. Speak to you soon. Take care. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this week's episode. Remember, your pet loss grief is real and it is so valid. Please be gentle on yourself. Until next time, take care.